There's a moment buried in the fourth episode of House of the Dragon's third season that changes everything we thought we knew about how this story ends, and almost nobody talked about it the week it aired. A quiet scene, a private conversation between a mother and daughter. And somewhere in that exchange, the show quietly rewrote one of the most brutal chapters in George R.R. Martin's entire history of Westeros. Helaena Targaryen tells her mother Alicent that she's pregnant. On the surface, that's just another piece of palace drama in a season full of it. But if you know Fire and Blood, you know this single line of dialogue just detonated a plot point that's been building since season 1, and it forces us to ask a question the show has never had to answer before. What happens when the adaptation runs out of book to adapt from? Here's the thing that makes this so strange. In Martin's original text, Helaena never gets pregnant during the War for the Throne. She already has 3 children when the fighting starts, and the youngest of them, a boy named Maelor, has been conspicuously missing from the show since it began. Fans noticed his absence almost immediately, especially once the show reached the murder of Prince Jaehaerys at the hands of the assassins Blood and Cheese. In the book, that scene is a nightmare, specifically because Helaena has 2 sons to choose between, and she has to pick one to die, knowing full well the other will suffer for the rest of his life with that knowledge. The show simplified it. Just one boy and his twin sister. Simplified, but also gutted of one of its cruelest details. So when the series suddenly gives Helaena a pregnancy that doesn't exist anywhere in Martin's book, the obvious theory writes itself. This is the show finally bringing Maelor back just years later and through a completely different door. And if that's true, it isn't a minor tweak. It's a structural rewrite of one of the most consequential relationships in the entire Dance of the Dragons. Because in the source material, Maelor's fate is the thing that pushes his mother toward the ending that defines her. Let's talk about paternity for a second, because the show has quietly planted a landmine here too. Aegon, Helaena's husband, spent most of Season 2 recovering from catastrophic injuries severe enough that he explicitly says he can no longer father children. The show never tells us exactly how far along this pregnancy is, which means the timeline is doing a lot of quiet, deliberate work. It's not confirmed that Aegon isn't the father, but the door has been left open just wide enough for speculation, especially given how the show has spent 2 seasons hinting at an emotional closeness between Helaena and her brother Aemond that goes beyond simple family loyalty. That theory has its own problems, since Helaena refused to help Aemond ride to war and reportedly foresaw his death, which isn't exactly the behavior of someone protecting a secret lover. But the ambiguity itself is the point. The show wants you asking this question, because the answer determines who has a claim to a throne that half of Westeros is already killing each other over. And that's really what makes this change so dangerous within the story. A legitimate son born to Aegon threatens Rhaenyk's claim the moment he's born. A child whose paternity is in question threatens Helaena's safety instead. Either way, this baby walks into the most volatile political situation in the entire show. And there's no version of this where that ends peacefully. Now here's where it gets darker, because the book gives us Helena's ending, and it's not subtle about how she gets there. In Fire and Blood, the guilt of choosing which son would die is one of the forces that drives her to take her own life, jumping from a window onto the spikes below. The show hasn't shown us that moment yet, but it's clearly building towards some version of it. The question this new pregnancy raises is brutal in its simplicity. If this baby is meant to become the Maelor of the books, does that mean the show is going to make Helaena live through losing a child she just gave birth to, layering fresh grief on top of the trauma she already carries? Or is the show building an entirely new tragedy, one where Rhaenyra, painted throughout this adaptation as more merciful than her book counterpart, is finally forced into a decision that breaks that image for good? There's also the shadow of George R.R. Martin hanging over all of this. Maelor's removal from the show was one of the specific changes Martin publicly criticized after Season 2, and reports suggest his reaction to hearing how Season 3 would handle this material was less than warm. Whether this pregnancy storyline is the show's way of course-correcting, or whether it's charting an entirely new path that diverges even further from his vision, is something we genuinely don't know yet. What we do know is that this decision closes off certain outcomes and opens up others. And every episode from here forward is going to be shaped by whichever direction the writers commit to. Whatever happens, one thing feels certain. This storyline is not going to end quietly. Somewhere between the politics of succession and the personal devastation waiting for Helaena, House of the Dragon has set up a collision it can't walk back from. The only real mystery left is who survives it and who becomes the next casualty of a war that keeps finding new ways to punish the people who never wanted to fight it in the first place. Somewhere in the aftermath of the siege on Harrenhal, House of the Dragon quietly dropped one of its biggest loose threads of the season, and it's easy to miss because nobody actually says it out loud. Aemond Targaryen wins that battle. He kills Sir Simon Strong, he takes the castle, and then he simply vanishes from the story, along with the largest, oldest, most dangerous dragon left alive in Westeros. No body. No confirmation. Just silence where a one-eyed prince and his monster of a dragon used to be. That silence is doing a lot of work. Alice Rivers, the only person who seems to know anything, doesn't give Kristen Cole a straight answer about where either of them went. She only passes along that Rhaenyra's taken King's Landing, which conveniently sidesteps the actual question everyone in that room once answered. And Ormond Hightower feels that absence immediately, because his entire war plan depends on Vhagar's size and age advantage over every other dragon on the board. Without her, his forces are dramatically undermatched against Rhaenyra's fleet of full-grown dragons, and even Daeron's Targaryen isn't old enough to close that gap. So where is he? The wound Aemond took at Harrenhal is clearly part of it, and the show has left enough ambiguity to suggest recovery, retreat, or something worse. Vhagar is ancient by this point in the timeline, older than every other dragon in the war combined, and there's a real possibility the show is setting up her death as much as it's hiding Aemond's location. Losing Vhagar wouldn't just remove a weapon from the board, it would remove the single biggest deterrent, keeping Aemond's side from being completely outmatched in the air. There's also the political angle worth sitting with. Aemond has spent 2 seasons positioning himself as the most ruthless claimant to power in his family, and a sudden disappearance right when his side needs him most either weakens his position or sets up a dramatic return exactly when it matters. Given how deliberately the show has been building toward a larger confrontation between him and Rhaenyra's dragons, this gap in the story feels less like an oversight and more like a fuse being lit. As the war continues to spiral, the next episode looks ready to shift the balance of power once again. With tensions rising across Westeros, every decision now carries consequences that could echo for generations. New alliances will be tested, old rivalries are likely to explode, and several key players may be forced into choices that change the course of the conflict forever. The calm that settled over the story feels temporary, and if the series has taught us anything, it's that moments of silence are usually followed by shocking betrayals, devastating losses, or game-changing revelations. Episode 5 could be the chapter that sets the stage for the next major battle, leaving both sides closer than ever to a point of no return. Where do you think Aemond and Vhagar actually are right now? Let me know your theory in the comments and stick around, because this is exactly the kind of thread that tends to snap right when you least expect it. So who do you think fathered that baby, and do you think Helaena makes it out of this season alive? Drop your theory in the comments, hit like if this broke your brain a little, and subscribe if you want to be here when we find out exactly how far off book this show is willing to go.